You can't just put stuff on the shelf. It's a different ocean. It's a different planet than selling online. And so you have to sell on shelf. And there's certain aspects that go to that in terms of the marketing for the products, the distinguishability, like how they differ on shelf visually, the cost, is obviously what people look at a lot.
Welcome to Becoming Radical, the podcast for creators, builders, and dreamers just like you. What does it mean to become radical in a world of constant change? Hosted by Michael Gaizutis, each week we'll explore the real-time journeys of those rewriting the rules. From untold failures to groundbreaking success. If you're ready to break the boundaries of limited thinking, this is your guide to unlimited growth.
Welcome to Becoming Radical. We are excited to be here today with you again. I am joined by Sean Busch. Sean, it is great to have you here today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Michael. It's wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I want to talk about you today and your success stories, your background, everything you've done to date that has allowed you to get to where you are, and to share a lot of those, ups and downs and all arounds that have made you and built the brands you've built. Your background is super impressive, to say the least. Looking at where you were in most recent times with Puracy, extremely successful household product plant-based brand that, if I have it right, did about 100 million in sales, went to acquisition. Am I right on that? Is that correct?
Yeah, 100 million in total brand sales over the course of the history.
Amazing. Really impressive. And then, of course, how you guys channeled that into what you're doing today with Dad Mode. Again, entering similar but different category, but helping modern dads and thinking about this approach to really redefine what success can mean like and equip dads with what they need in today's world. So to get into it, I think a great starting point is really to hear a little bit more about Puracy. Again, massive success story. What sparked you initially to building that natural cleaning brand? What got you into that?
So to put a quick background on that particular brand was, I started my first cleaning company when I was 16. I started a car detailing company in New York. And I ended up doing a lot of R&D for the chemical manufacturers in that space. And I posted a lot of my work online, and that's kind of how I grew. Fast forward, I ended up down in Texas, in Austin, in 2009. I was hired by one of my clients at the time, who initially wanted me to come detail his cars, but then realized, that I would be more helpful to his actual corporation. So I ran biz dev for his e-commerce CPG company for a few years. And then, a couple of years in, I just got the itch. I started to expose myself to, e-commerce, internet marketing, consumer products, and I fell in love. And I was like, we're at this interesting intersection in my personal life where my wife and I were trying to get pregnant. We were having a really hard time doing so. And, you start evaluating everything in your life. You start hyperanalyzing everything down to what am I using on my clothing to clean it, and what am I using on my counters, and am I exposing myself to too many chemicals? And so there had already been that movement with 7th Gen, but more recently we had seen Jessica Alba and the Honest Company do it on her website, and I was like, wow, if people are willing to buy in 2013 laundry detergent on the internet, that's amazing. And it was right around that time where I met my business partner, who was my neighbor. He was starting a family of his own. And, we'd talk about different business ideas, playing ping pong in his garage late at night. And this sort of came high up because we started looking at our households and realized we both had Honest Company products in there. I had a background in cleaning products and developing cleaning products. And I said, let me take another look at the chemistry, make sure that the green chemistry is kind of caught up with traditional conventional chemical chemistry. And see if we could put together some really efficacious products, and then we'll launch them on Amazon. And so, long story short, that's kind of what we came up with. And we launched our company in late 2013 on a shoestring budget. We came up with 4 different SKUs. We launched with less than $20,000 in capital, and that's
Wow.
four production runs, label design, branding work, all that stuff. So we just hacked it together
Yep.
and we just threw it on Amazon. And at the time, Amazon was beautiful. It was all organic.
Oh, yeah.
There were no ads, and you could optimize titles and keywords and backend keywords and all these things that used to have value back then. And then we focused on reviews. We focused on sending product to customers and asking for their honest review, before it was advantageous to do so. And that's how we started to build better products, just by taking that consumer insight. And then we took it one step further, and it kind of started that flywheel where somebody would say, "Hey, I thought your scent was too strong." And then you start to collect a lot of that feedback, and you'd go back and do the next production run and like dial it back by 20%, right? On the scent level. And then we go back to those people and say, "Hey, look, we heard you. Thank you. Can we send you a product, our new production product for free at no charge, no strings attached, but we want to see if we hit this right." And most of them were like, "I'm shocked. Like, first of all, you listened. Second of all, you reached back out. Third of all, you're going to send me the product for free." And then all of a sudden you have these cheerleaders because they're like, "Well, yeah, it's better. And also it's amazing to know that my feedback is going somewhere." So that sort of kicked off our customer-centric approach. But really, it came down to when we started this company, we were starting families. We started to do our initial consumer research with all of our friends who were starting families at the time. And really the core of it was, we asked these moms or soon-to-be moms, like, what is the most important thing when it comes to household cleaning and personal care products for your children? And the word pure and pure ingredients kept coming back over and over and over again. And so Puracy was born by really just kind of putting together the suffix ACY, which is the state of. So the state of pure is really kind of the loose definition of the brand.
I love that context, that history, listening to your customers, understanding what they needed, what they wanted. And I had my wife look back because I remembered your brand name, Puracy, and I was right. We ordered several of your products on Amazon few years back, and she pulled it up. She's like, "Oh yeah, this is how much we spent." She loved the product. So clearly you resonated, you got results. It was one of those victory dances that you could do because you understood your audience, you understood your market. You took the time, you listened, and you gave back. You serviced others. You said, "How can we build a better product, a better brand?" And I think so many times, more often than not, a lot of it, as we were talking about before we recorded the show, a lot of big CPG or big brands in general don't often do that. They spend a lot of dollars and cents in some areas, but not enough in others. And I think you guys did an incredible job there.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're talking about tough moments, we always love to talk about those because they're not talked about enough, right? We
I
talk
agree.
about the victories, the successes. Here's how I made $1 billion, but not what it was like to get to $1 billion, right? In becoming radical. What was the toughest moment or moments you think in building Puracy? How did you guys navigate that? What did that look like?
It's an awesome question. I love going down that path because frankly, like that's how I learn, right? And I try to teach my kids that as well. The best lesson in life is failure. And we should encourage failure because it means that you're taking risks. And I think that too often nowadays, there's just not enough risk taking. There's not enough people really trusting themselves to say, let me go ahead and stack the odds against me and try to go out there and let myself fail, just knowing that in 99.9% of the cases, it's not the end of the world, right? It's a teachable moment. So when I look back at that on Puracy, there are a couple of key aspects, right? And I think the one that I talk about quite a bit and obviously have fixed this time around, just a little bit of a nugget there into why dad mode exists now, but
Yeah.
was we bootstrapped the company. And I love that, right? I mean, I loved the grittiness of when you are resource constrained, you are going to be more innovative. It's just how it works because you have to survive. So rather than write checks, you have to go and you have to think and talk to people and just dig deep. And again, try things, and a lot of them just don't work. But I think that when you have two critical events in the business history, which are, we bootstrapped the company. We were profitable month 14 online. It was really kind of an amazing thing looking back. And right around mid 2018, we were approached by a broker in Minneapolis who was very direct in his desire to represent us at Target. And, we had wanted to get into Target. It was just right down the fairway for us in terms of target market. It was perfect, right?
Yeah.
And, so we went there, we knocked the presentation out of the park, 22-minute presentation, and they took 5 products initially. And it was just like, boom. And then that was one department. And then all of a sudden he's like, now we're going to leverage this against the other departments you sell into. And before you knew it, we had almost 30 products into Target in early 2019. And so on the surface, it's wow, right? Everybody's like, that's so cool. It's Target. And your assumption is we're just going to knock it out of the park, right? We're going to put these things on the shelf and they're going to sell just like Amazon. No show. It just didn't happen. So, there were a couple of big lessons in there. So one was you can't just put stuff on the shelf and hope it's going to sell, right? It's a different ocean. It's a different planet, right? Than selling online. And so you have to sell on shelf, and there's certain aspects that go to that in terms of the marketing for the products, the distinguishability, like how they differ on shelf visually, the cost, is obviously what people look at a lot. But for us, it was a couple things, right? So one was we went in very wide, not deep. And I think that doing it all over again, we probably would have started with, let's take our one department, let's say, and go and say, okay, we want to start here. Obviously, we want to get all our products in, but we want to get this department right because it's all about velocities. Let's say your hurdle is 1 unit per store per week. So that's 1 unit sold per store per week. If you are at 0.9, you're on the chopping block, right? If you're at 1.1, you're a hero. So, but for us, it's like we have all of these, spinning tops in the air, and you're just kind of like, you're trying to just juggle, first of all, your behemoth of online business, and then your target business, which is like critically important. And now, guess what? Everybody sees what you're doing, right? Because the IRI data, the Nielsen data out there, so everybody knows what you're selling, and you don't want to fall on your face. And so and then in the undercurrent of all this was, we had the products priced at a certain way online, and we were very confident in that pricing because we were successful with it. Target came in and was like, look, you have to meet us in the middle, right? So you were selling hand soap for $6, maybe $7, depending on the context per bottle. On our shelves, we're selling hand soap for $4. We need you to be at $5. We need you to shave $1 off, right? And this really happened across the entire product portfolio. And then once you had that happen in stores, everything online had to change as well. So all of a sudden, you're shaving $1 or $2 off of every single product across your whole portfolio, right? And so the point I'm getting to here is that this is example one of I wish we had a CFO, right? Like way back when.
Yes.
Their primary job is to make sure you don't run out of money. So them to kind of model that stuff out and then realize that. And then number 2 was when we hit COVID, where, initially, and I'll never forget it, right? Feb 29, 2020, I get 2 calls within 2 hours of each other. The first was from our target broker. The second was from Walmart directly. And they're like, hey, I see you have hand sanitizer on your website. How much can we buy from you? And when can you get it here? You're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And so the first couple of months I was like, oh, this is what Apple feels like when they launch a new iPhone, right? You're just like, everything you put up, sold. No ads, no nothing. It's
crazy,
sold, right?
Just done.
Hand soap, surface cleaner, hand sanitizer, everything. And so hand sanitizer, we made the bet, and I'm still happy we made it, to go ahead and say, you know what, Target, we were in kind of this teetering area with Target. And they were, we were a little bit below hurdle. And I kind of went to him. I said, look, I'm going to sacrifice our online business, right, for you to get you this hand sanitizer. We're going to take 5,000 bottles for our customers and limit them to a bottle or 2 each. But we're going to give you guys 250,000 bottles in the next 3 months. And that's as much as we possibly can make.
Wow.
But in exchange, you got to keep us on the shelf. Right? You got to give us another shot. Give us another cycle. And so that worked. But what happened was you get a few months in, all of a sudden, obviously, the competitive landscape changed completely. I mean, you had vodka companies making hand sanitizer, so that kind of went out the window. And then you had the other products that you had, your surface cleaner, your hand soap, the things that no other companies, were coming to market with, but you still had to make them because they were still in high demand. And what happened was, we shared, we only had a few different bottle sizes. We shared them across a number of SKUs. So we ordered more bottles. And that was for like one SKU that was about to go out. And you knew that you had the 6 to 8 week lead time. And then all of a sudden you get to week 6 and they're kind of like, hey, I'm sorry, we had a machine break. And so it's going to be another 4 weeks. And then you get to another 4 weeks. And then it's, yeah, we had a really big order come in and you guys got bumped out of line. It's going to be another 4 weeks. And then all of a sudden that one SKU turned into like 5 SKUs. And then it started to happen to multiple bottles. And then you got to this point in the summer where you're like, we can't get any bottles. We have formula to sell. We just have nothing to put it into. And so the reality was this. We had to buy at 3 to 4x what we typically would. Otherwise, these bottles companies just turned their nose up and said, look, I have big CPG coming to me with a 1 million bottle order and you guys want to order 100K, 200K. I'm sorry. Like, what do you expect me to do? Business is business. And so what we had to do as a bootstrap company was like, hey, we got to dig deep. We got to go into savings. We got to stop paying ourselves. And we have to buy a lot of bottles so that we can have product to sell. And then on the flip side of that, so now you have all this like money that's basically sitting in the middle of the ocean, right? Because it's just sitting in bottles and components, which doesn't do you a whole lot. And so then your marketing team is coming to you and saying, hey, where's our ad budget, right?
Yeah, it's not there.
Yeah, so like you have those situations where, it's like if you're going to war, you have to be well capitalized. And that was just one of those things that came out of left field that our supply chain was running so well at that time. And then it's like just the bottom fell out. So I guess long-windedly, what I'm getting to is that a CFO in those two particular circumstances would have been worth his weight in gold to be able to help us navigate him or her, navigate those two particular situations. And I think that's, something where before we even were really incorporated as a business, I already had a CFO fractionally identified for dad mode because it was like, hey, I need you to model this from day one. And we modeled e-com, Amazon, TikTok, Target, Walmart. We modeled out 5 years of the business. Obviously, years 2 through 5 are, I guess, but at least from a unit economic standpoint, we were sound from that standpoint.
It's so huge. I mean, if you think about it, the leave behind that I hear a lot, I'm hearing it from you. I hear it a lot. I believe it. It is instilled in my brain now completely. Hire a CFO, even fractionally, even if you're in the process of growing your earlier stage, align with somebody who can help you model, project, look at the existing landscape, the future landscape. It is so important. It's so imperative, especially as you're scaling. As you're scaling, it's even more imperative because there's all these unforeseens. And, my wife tells me this every day. She's really good with being conservative on the financial end. She's like, you need CFO. You need a CFO. But yes, I agree with you. I wish I would have thought this way 10 years ago. That'd be great. But,
That's right.
Lesson learned, like we talked about, right? So that brings me to a question. Scaling a business is very different than starting a business. This is often what we talk about here on Becoming Radical, because you're in the gray area. You're a builder, you're moving, you're changing and challenging industries. You're not just starting it. It's not from day one in most cases. What was the key there in scaling Puracy specifically, as we kind of think back in time?
There were a couple of key moments. I think that the review piece is really big, right? That sort of initiating the flywheel of, hey, all of a sudden this brand that nobody's ever heard of has like 500 reviews on their body wash. And at the time, 500 was a lot. Now everything has like tens of thousands of reviews, but you have 500 reviews and it's like 4.8 stars. How is that possible that I never heard of this brand before? And so that really kind of put us on the map. And at the time, reviews were such a heavy weight in terms of consumer consideration to their purchasing that you had a couple of those products that really stood out. We had our body wash, we had our stain remover, we had our baby shampoo. And then obviously our household products all did pretty well in that regard. And so that became the goal. The goal was like, let's start to get the reviews going. We want, and then you saw those initial thresholds, right? You saw the 100 review threshold. All of a sudden, your sales are like, oop, all of a sudden, new normal. 500, new normal. 1,000, new normal. And then, when we got to our first product to 10,000, it was actually a little bit underwhelming. For whatever reason, the difference between 9,500 reviews and 10,100 reviews is like, all right, it's a good product. I get it. So, but the goal was get all of our products to have reviews like that in a legit way, right? We wanted to have, if there was anything like, there's some review scoring apps out there that kind of say like, oh, okay, there's a lot of fake reviews here. We wanted ours to always score well and have legit reviews. So the review thing was big. The introduction of our first product, which was our laundry stain remover, was really big. First new product, sorry. So we launched with 4 products. Our first new product was about a year in, and then we tweaked that product 2 years in, and it became our hero SKU and was until the day I left Piracy. Over-engineered product with the idea that, and it's the same deal now, right? Like getting into the laundry room is the hardest room in the house to get into from a purchasing standpoint because people only change their laundry detergent 4 to 5 times in their adult life. And so it's like, well, how do you get in there if you can't, compete with the budgets of Tide and Gain and Persil? Well, you get in with a supplementary product, which is our stain remover. So it's same deal. You get in with a stain remover, you over-engineer it so that when they go and they use it, they're like, well, I don't need anything else to remove stains. This gets everything out. And then that starts to build enough trust to where people are like, okay, fine, I'll give the laundry detergent a shot. And then once you're in there, it's very sticky and it's very difficult to knock you out. So that product was a big win for us. And then we got a couple of big articles. We had a couple of media features, but one in particular, if you're familiar with the review site through New York Times called Wirecutter, we were featured in 2017 as their best surface cleaner. And that was against, again, all the big players out there. And we won fair and square. And that was, I like Wirecutter because, first of all, we had no idea. All of a sudden our sales went up. We're like, where's this all coming from? And, they don't accept product samples. They don't accept anything. It's all 100% objective, legit. They go out and buy them on their own. They will not talk to you. To this day, I've never spoken with somebody at Wirecutter. Like they're very much, there's some integrity there, which is wonderful. And that's why people trust them. But that put our brand on the map. And then, obviously when you get into Target, things change as well. You start to, even if the sales aren't there, it legitimizes your brand. So there's a couple of those key steps that really put us on the map.
Brand trust is so vital. You talked about that. I think if you can build brand trust, and it can be real, there's an authenticity layer to brand trust. You can't fabricate this. It takes time. It takes grit. It takes grind. It takes perseverance, relentlessness, a lot of risk to get to that level of brand trust. Very important. What made you step away from Piracy? How did you know it was time for something new? What did that look like for you, Sean?
We got an offer and I've never really mentioned this before, but we got an offer pretty early on in the business from I would say a mid-sized European strategic. And it was in like early 2018. We were probably going to do about 15 million in revenue that year with basically 2 employees, myself and one other person. I mean, it was amongst the most fun I was having in that entire life cycle of the business. And then, it just didn't make sense. And part of the reason was they wanted me there for 6 years after the sale. And I was like, that's really long. And then, so like we said, let's keep the discussions going. We then got an offer from PE. We looked at that. We're like, hey, do we raise some growth capital? And so, it's more growth equity, I guess. And, we get to 2 weeks before close and we're kind of like, man, the business is doing so well. Like, do we really want to give up this much equity? And, and then we didn't do that. Right. And then I've already obviously mentioned these things where we probably could have used their help, not just monetarily, but also from strategic standpoint.
Strategic, yeah.
And then, you kind of got to this point where in 2019, we were like, at the point where things were going really well. We had just gotten into Target. You were kind of riding this wave really well. And it sort of felt like the right time to go ahead and pack it up. And so we started a process. We went to market. We started doing all these meetings and everything. We hired an investment banker and we got our first round of bids. And it was not quite as healthy as we had hoped, but it wasn't horrible. And we got our second round of bids the first week of February and then of 2020. And then, what happens from there. So COVID happened. We put our pencils down, and so did everybody else in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
And we kind of picked everything back up in late 2020 with the hopes that we just picked this thing right back up. But we had somehow become like the hey, I don't know which way is up brand. It's like, well, our sales are through the roof, but they're kind of like, I don't know if is that real sales or is that just pandemic sales? And then at the same time, then they started to get, then you don't have that sort of those tailwinds behind you anymore. Now you have headwinds. Is your revenue real? Oh, by the way, like your company is not really structured from a personnel standpoint the right way. And so we went out and we hired a CFO, hired a CMO, hired a CTO, built out the executive team correctly. And then we went back to market in early 21 and, we kind of realized there was like a fork in the road. Do we go and we take growth equity? Because at this point we kind of committed that we wanted to find some liquidity in the business because we had built it to this point and now it was on, a little bit more shaky ground than we had been used to. And so we wanted to find some liquidity and it was either do we do growth equity with some secondary equity and then build this thing for another few years, use their money to help hire a bigger team and spend more money on marketing, and then hope you get an acquisition. Or, we had this group of CPG and Amazon aggregators, which we didn't really identify with because we weren't an Amazon brand at that point.
Interesting.
But they were just chomping down our throats. They were just all on our heels. They were really interested. And then when you started to talk to some of them and they were like, look, we love that you have a D2C presence, that that's had a real D2C business. So like at that point, we were doing 60% Amazon, 20% D2C, 20% retail. And they were like, that's a nice split. We want to use this model for our other brands. And so, you start to get elevated in that sense. And then you realize, looking back, the valuation metrics in 2021 were, somewhere in the vicinity of peak valuation.
Yeah.
And so that's where, things kind of made sense for us. And honestly, until the second I signed, I wasn't for sure. I remember distinctly, coming home the final week of diligence, my wife is like, you are gray, like you don't have color in your face, like is everything okay? And I remember, the hour leading up to the final signing of the paperwork, I think I'd sat in my office and I cried for a couple of minutes. It's you incubate this brand from an idea to a brand at the time we saw we were doing 31 million in annual revenue with no outside capital. And you're like, is this the right move? It's like, we built this amazing team. Are they going to be taken care of? It's like, am I just doing this for money or do I want to keep going down this road? And so you have all these, for me, it wasn't a total easy decision. And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's in that situation. I imagine it's similar. So,
yeah,
you make the decision, you move forward, you accept the reality, and then you do the best you can to kind of optimize for best outcome.
There's so much emotion behind building and scaling a business. And while it is very objective, data-driven, as we've talked about, right? When you're a builder, when you're a founder, a creator, leadership, part of that founding team, it hits home differently when you're there at the beginning, right? You've shaped it, you've formed it, and you're thinking, how could I let this go? Because success looks different at different times, right? At first you're ramping up, you're thinking, how do I build something great, right? And then you get traction, you get velocity, as you said, right? You get market acceptance and trust, brand trust. And then that's validated and co-validated, and you see money coming in. You're like, wow, this is working, right? And then it's scaling, and then it's very profitable. But then you come to this impasse where it's like, okay, you could go here or you could go here. And you have to really get emotional about it because you have to sit back and think, what does that mean to me? And it sounds like you had that same inner conversation like most of us do, you know, and moving towards an M&A exercise, a merger and acquisition exercise, and actually moving through it. So I guess a question for you, if you could go back in time and really give yourself one piece of advice in the early days of Puracy, before we talk about everything else, what what would that be? What would be that one piece of advice you give yourself?
Honestly, I think the whole experience has shaped me, and I really wouldn't change much about it because there's been so much learning and wisdom that I have taken and I have applied to dad mode, as well as, I like to share this outwardly in terms of my experiences of starting a business and scaling it. And, not just sort of publicly, but also privately with other entrepreneurs, because I think that if I could help them navigate one situation better than I did at the time, I
Yes,
think that's a win. That's a value for society. It helps. So I think entrepreneurs are really the sort of the lifeblood of our economy,
absolutely.
and so the reality still comes back to the same thing, right? Is that you find the things that you are not good at, and you find somebody to plug in there, and I think that becomes that CFO discussion. And look, like, even when we brought our CFO in, and I didn't do him the best uh, service by bringing him in when the company was in very choppy waters. We had a lot of arguments and things where you're basically yelling at each other at certain points. Crazy entrepreneur versus conservative financial guy, and you get to these points, these heated moments, but at the same time, without that, it's just my co-founder and I going down this path of, we're going to figure it out, or not.
The tango.
Um,
You're tangoing. You have to be rhythmic together, and you need those people. I loved what you said there. You're filling in the gaps. I was brought up, and a lot of what I heard, even though my parents weren't entrepreneurs, one of them was my mom was very entrepreneurial in spirit, right? And she would always say, you need to improve your strengths and manage your weaknesses. And it's interesting because some people can't relate to that. But I think as an entrepreneur, as a builder, somebody tuning in today, it's not to say you don't want to do those things fairly well that, you know, other people can do really well. You still want to do them fairly well, but you need people that do them really well, of which you do fairly well. And you need to really accelerate, push the gas, or whatever it is. If you're an electric vehicle, the pedal. You need to move quickly enough and scale out those things which you're really good at, and then align with people that can be such a force to you. I think, just as you said, the builders, the creators, the entrepreneurs are the main factor of growth in our economy. But that's really, I think, a principal reason is they have great support that can enable them. And you hit it. Thinking about dad mode, it's such. I know you're featuring it here today. I love that you have your products. It's amazing. It's such a relatable concept. What was the aha moment that led to that creation? What was the first, like, the in past the first point which said, yeah, we need to get into dad mode and actually build this out?
so let me take one half of a step back and just add on one piece to that previous question. So I said the CFO. Another area that I think that, looking back, to do differently was, I got so focused on being in the weeds, the grittiness, the day to day, that the just making just keeping all the balls in the air, right? All your ducks in a row. That at some point, it just becomes so big. Like, I talked to every single customer from the day that we sold our first product on January 4th, 2014, to the time that we hired our first employee, which was right around the beginning of 2017. So for 3 years straight, I was customer service. I heard everything from the customers.
Yep.
The problem is that when you start to take on the volume of these things, and then you're doing supply chain and you're doing product dev, you lose some of the long-term vision.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of what I lost. Was we just, you start to realize, looking back, and like, I didn't realize this until we sold the company and I was able to take a breath.
Yeah.
I stayed on for 2.5 years after we sold, but a month after we sold and after some of the emotions had died down, you start to think to yourself, you're like, whoa, like I missed a lot of stuff. I missed this new product development. I missed where the market was going because I was so focused on trying to just force these products
Mm,
into Target, into Amazon. And sometimes you have to realize that it's just not a fit,
yeah.
and you got to pivot a little bit, or you were too late. Like we created this amazing natural deodorant when deodorant was on the rise, natural deodorant was on the rise. We were too late to market on it.
Yep.
And it's like all these other companies passed us by. And so like,
Yeah.
you kind of lose some, and then you put on Amazon with the hopes that Amazon was what it was years ago, where you just put things on and get a bunch of reviews and all of a sudden it sells. Well, that wasn't the case. So, that was, I think that was a really important part of me coming to terms with this. But when it comes to dad mode, the aha moment was part of that, right? Was like, hey, I've missed some things in the market, but one of the things that I didn't miss was one of the reasons we decided to sell was like, for me personally, I wanted to be more present. I had, prioritized this business, and to the sacrifice of time with at the time, my son and I guess my daughter was born first, but when we sold, my son and daughter, my son had just been born, and my wife. And, by the end of Puracy, I had no hobbies, none. I'd given them all up. And so you just dedicate everything. And then you realize you're like, "Well, for what? Like, what is the point?" Right. At some point, um, yeah, at least for me, I know some people like their goals are, I want to make as much money as they possibly can. That I thought that was my goal, but then you have kids and you realize like, okay, that's not everything. Like you have these two kids that you want to you want them to grow into um, contributing, kind, decent, respectable members of society, and you want to have fun doing it. And so I started to take that in stride, and I started to, volunteer at school and coach soccer and be there for a lot of different events, and I loved it. And then I started to talk with a lot of other dads who were now working from home because of COVID, and you start to realize like, hey, dads are doing a little bit more around the house. And then I started to was like, well, let me just go ahead and formalize this. So I did some formal consumer research and realized like, whoa, yeah, they are. And then you realize you start to draw parallels around, well, think about what's gone on in men's grooming over the past 10 to 15 years. Like 15 years ago, it was like Old Spice and Brute. And now you have, Dr. Squatch and Everyman Jack, and you get 2 aisles at Target and Walmart. And just giant brands. It's not like men were not taking showers or caring for their skin. It's just none of the brands spoke to them. So, we wanted to have, so like you start to add these things into the fact that, okay, there's a gap in this market, there's a gap in this market, and then you look at household cleaning, there's no brands in household cleaning target men. And we targeted dads because two reasons. One, kids are the biggest mess makers in society, and therefore the high, these will be the highest consumers of our products. And then two, we looked at it from twofold. From the second point, which was, hey, if dads want to do more on the house and they're the ones buying the products, moms are not going to turn that down, right? They're not going to turn down more help with the laundry or cleaning the kitchen. And then the flip side of that, if moms see products that, are catered to dads, they might encourage them to do a little bit more. And then I think the sort of cherry on top was us digging into this from a psychological standpoint a bit more. And then there was a few different scientific studies that were done in the mid 2000s, probably 2015 to 18, that showed that dads who did more chores around the house got laid more. And you're like, oh wow, here we go. Here's our soundbite. And so you start to package that up together. You come up with these cool matte black aluminum bottles because nobody wants to have plastic in their life anymore. Everybody's concerned about microplastics and the fact that like they just look awesome and they're going to last the same amount of time as a plastic bottle, but it's much better to have aluminum. And so you start to go down this path, and then it just becomes a snowball effect. And then you test it in the market and you're like, well, yeah, like why didn't anybody else think about this?
It's brilliant. I love that. When you think about the biggest difference between starting Puracy and launching Dad Mode. What was the biggest difference there, you think, between the two?
So with Puracy, we did very, very minimal branding work, consumer research, messaging work. We focused on the product formulas and the brand name and the Amazon launchpad, if you will, launching on FBA. And that became really sticky over time. And we went through like a number of brand refreshes over the history of that business. And, I look back and I have, a bunch of old bottles, in my office, mementos. And it just, you sort of like lose it, right? I mean, it's like, people are like, wait, I remember that one. And like, oh, I really like that one. And it just sort of evolved so much over the, 8 years of the business that, we wanted something that was going to be very impactful for day one and not change much. So we went and did formal consumer research, and then we hired a big branding agency to do all our branding.
Yep.
And, it's very, very distinctive in what the final product is. So like when people get these products, they're, whoa, this is like, there's all these just Easter eggs throughout all of these designs. You spend so much time on them. So I think that was one key thing, but thinking through all the aspects that makes consumers tick, I think is another important one. So we did focus a lot on the efficacy of the formulas. That's just sort of my background. And so we've sent these out now to just tons of reviewers and influencers and ambassadors, but we've also sent them out to experts in the media who test out laundry and household cleaning products. And then, influencers that are, self-professed laundry experts. And they've all come back with this, whoa, this is really good stuff. And like, we just got a feature a couple weeks ago that we're now in the top tier of, we're in the top 3 of laundry stain removers of all laundry stain removers that exist.
Good for
like,
you guys.
I knew that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I knew that. But it's like, now you have this validation. And so at the end of the day, that's what people care about the most. Is it going to work? Right? Is it going to work? And we focused a little bit less on things that were table stakes like natural ingredients. Yeah, these are 95+% natural ingredients. But I think the big thing overarching was cleaning products, cleaning brands are super, super boring. And they're just airy, and they talk about the pastels and the flowers and just, it's just so uninteresting. Like, who wants to follow them? And so like we saw what like Dude Wipes is doing with their marketing. We saw what Liquid Death was doing with their marketing. And that's why we really leaned into this sort of chore play aspect. And then we started to build this brand content calendar around it, where some days you're providing some dad jokes, right? You're providing some efficacy videos of like, all right, here's some stains that we get, from our messy kids and, cleaning those. And then you have those days where you talk about, hey, you only have 18 summers with your kids, and your kid's 18 years old. And so you have that sort of self-reflection moment of, okay, here's like 30-second perspective on how I should be recalibrating my mindset with my kids, even though I'm having a hard day today with them. So, it became this bigger desire to have a big movement around dads just stepping up more in society, because I think that, with moms, there are a tremendous amount of resource for moms and soon to be moms. And with dads, it's very fragmented, and there's no centralized resource. And you have this growing population of dads that want to do a bit more, but in a lot of senses are, myself included, until I really started to educate myself, we're a little bit misguided. I'm like, what are parenting protocols now for, for disciplining and motivating your kids? And then all the way down to, things like, how do I only have a few minutes per day? Like, my schedule's so busy. How do I maximize that time with my kids? So, in terms of the impact that I make on them. And so, yeah, I mean, for us, we want to create a bigger movement around trying to bring good insights and data and information in a funny, educational, and, sometimes suggestive humor way, so that it's really entertaining for people and they're getting value out of it.
It's very cool. I love the idea of leading with brand purpose, and, you extend that out to building a great brand is so much more than the visual side. On the other side of my life, for the last 15 years, run a global branding and digital agency. So I'm very familiar with this space. And I think you guys have done a tremendous job of the visual branding side. But
Thank you.
balance between great product and brand purpose and mission and who you're talking to is equally so important. And it's so cool to hear you guys check that box too. You said, how do we build a great product? How do we approach this differently from everybody else in the market radically, and how do we serve the underserved, the gap in the market, so to speak, where there are so many misconceptions about fatherhood, and you're really trying to break that down with dad mode. So I
That's right.
you guys have nailed that. And that is not an easy thing to nail, and it seems like it's supporting modern dads who are going through the trenches of navigating their everyday life, and they're looking outward and also inward to where's the time, how do I help, where's a product for me, and I think again that's where you guys have really succeeded and are probably more than likely, with total certainty almost, going to keep propelling forward in market. So I'm very excited to watch that. I'm sure our listeners are too. If we think about entrepreneurship, Sean, it's demanding. We all know that, right? How do you now balance running this business and anything else you're doing with being present with your family, with your life, with your hobbies, the things that you enjoy now in today's time?
I'll tell you what, it was much easier to start a business with no kids.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's just like, you just turn it on and you just go,
Yeah.
right?
That's it.
And you just sort of cut everything else out of your life.
Yep.
And now you can't, right? Because you have this limited window that you have with your children. And so I'll tell you what, it's a moving target. There's no 2 days that are the same. I think that, yes, does it help that I have part of the playbook from before? Yes, that helps.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's impossible if you don't have it. It just becomes the situation where everything becomes deliberate in what you do. I am a disciplined person, and so that helps. But you really have to kind of push yourself in that aspect where I always kind of keep that in mind, right? I keep in mind as we talk about it in our when we look at our target market, it's dads with kids up to the age of 14, because after 14, they know everything. They're independent. They're off to doing their own thing. It's like my daughter's 8. I have less than 6 years left before she really starts to kind of become a more independent person and is not as interested in spending time with dad. Now, I hope to kind of foster a relationship that encourages that, but I know that likely she's going to have more play dates. She's going to go out and hang out with her friends. She's going to play more sports.
Yeah.
So I want to maximize that time. So, I have time in the morning where, I've taken up fitness after we sold Puracy. I run, I work out every day during the week, and I include them. And so they're in the gym with me in the morning.
Very
They
cool.
love that. Thank you. And so I make breakfast for them in the morning. It's a little extra time to kind of get them off to school. And then I go hard. I go hard for about 10 hours straight.
Wow.
And so by the time I'm done, I come out for 10 minutes to make my lunch, and that's kind of about it. And then, they get in, and they're in obviously from school way before I'm done with work. But then, I have about an hour at the end of the day to kind of spend with them to have dinner and maybe read some books or, find the newest YouTuber that we're kind of watching at that time and really kind of maximize that quality time. That's what I'm doing 2 months in. And then obviously weekends are weekends. I find those gaps where you have that 10 hours in the middle of the day. You can add another hour on after they go to bed if you need to. And look, we'll see how things go as we grow. But I think that, again, going back to that point I made earlier around finding those people that can help fill the gaps in your weaknesses is something that I have harnessed this time around, because before I just tried to do everything myself.
Yeah.
And it worked out pretty well. But looking back, it's like, all right, so there's somebody that, while I'll make the videos for content, I send them off to somebody to actually edit them. I'm not going to try it myself. Same thing with social and video, image editing. And so there's some specific things that I know I'm not going to bring value to. And I think that becomes the way to really kind of maximize things. And then I think the other important part about that is, as I go through this day-to-day interaction of just being a father, and a present father, it brings up all these new ideas for content and marketing angles that I think actually feed into the growth of the brand, because you're just putting yourself in a situation where it's like, yeah, there's just not enough hours in the day. How am I getting through this? How am I maximizing this time with them? And then also, the sort of inevitable messes that occur on a day-to-day basis. And then, you take a step back to kind of laugh at them. And you approach them, and then they see you cleaning, and then, they want to help out a little bit more. So that's the other piece of it, is that, dads who clean more get laid more, but also, like, there's so many more elements that go into that. It's really just, dad stepping up inside the house, not just outside the house. And kids learn through photosynthesis. They don't learn by you telling them to do things. They learn by observing. And so if they see you doing this, and then you ask them, hey, do you want to help? And, I don't know. I don't know how to clean. And it's like, well, how about you just spray it? Because that's really fun. You just spray this down. Like, oh, cool. Now my son is 5. That's all he wants to do. I want to spray the mess. And now he wants to wipe it. So it's like we're building some blocks here of being, independent. And so I think that those are, really important aspects to as we start to kind of just be a little bit more open about how do we be more present and impactful as fathers.
It's amazing. And, I think it's cool on a lot of levels. I really love the idea of taking the kids to the gym, to working out, wherever you are. If on a run, I want to incorporate that more and more. We have 2 kids, 2 boys, 10 and almost 7. And, it's busy every day, but I love how you're talking about being present. I also really love how you're building a business that you contextually are living through and understand. And I think that's really a salient thing to think about. There are people out there, and there's nothing wrong with this. They might build a care facility and they're in their 20s or 30s, and maybe they know no one that is in a care facility, and they're doing it for profit, not purpose. There isn't that alignment,
Yep.
right? Just we're flipping homes. Nothing wrong with that. But again, you may never live in one of those flipped homes. So I think there's something to be said about having something contextually relevant and near and dear to you that you understand more. Then you can apply those talents to the discipline set of building something you understand to serve you and others around you. And that goes a really long way. I think some of the most successful ventures out there, you've seen that with their founders, their entrepreneurs, their co-founders, and so on, their leadership. So I really enjoy seeing that from you. And, you've successfully built and scaled a company, right? So what are the biggest leadership lessons you've learned? Speaking of leadership, as our audience is listening, what are some of those big takeaways you think?
I think one that I mentioned at the beginning, I'll resonate again, is the, taking risk, right? Your bias to action. So and it starts from the infancy of, everybody's got a great idea. And I came up with this idea for Dad Mode after we sold Puracy. It took me a while actually to kind of come up and focus this. I had about 30 to 40 different business ideas that I came up with and settled in here. But I think that, taking that risk, taking that first step, taking some action is a big one, always. And just know that taking risk and action is just going to be like, okay, if it fails, cool. That's one thing we cross off the list. And you have to be resilient, right? I think that's another thing is the resiliency, that grit is important because, look, we're not even 2 months on the market. I want everything to go boom, right? And you think certain things are going to be that way. And maybe they are in certain aspects like view count, but don't translate into sales. And you just have to celebrate the small wins where you can, because as an entrepreneur, you can go days, weeks, months without any good wins. And it becomes very deflating and lonely, but you also have to realize that that's just the nature of the beast, right? And that's also one step closer to success. I think that, highlighting those gaps in your skill set, your weaknesses, and filling them with people that are really good, but I think also people that you trust and people that you can work well with. And that is something that it's a skill that you kind of develop over time, where you just know how to read people a little bit better and see like, hey, are we going to work together okay? I think that's a really important aspect. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't say, like, you got to listen to your customers. And I think that's where the gap is with big CPG and their customers. Like, they have the resources to be able to talk to a overwhelming amount of customers of theirs, and they don't do it. They just don't do it, right? The focus is just elsewhere. And it's sort of shocking to me, because you could do both quant and qual analysis on your consumer basis, and you could spend lots of money there instead of just marketing the same garbage that you market over and over and over again that may work, it may not work. And it really just comes down to the fact that people are just so loyal to certain products like laundry detergent that they keep buying them.
Yeah.
But that's where, I think on the flip side of that is like, that's where the opportunity comes for people like me and brands like that.
Oh, yeah.
Is that, we see that gap. We are going to try every which way to execute it. And then I think probably final thing is I tend to be very friendly with our small competitors, right? And even the big ones too. Like if, I know some people I knew some people at P&G and Unilever and SCJ and stuff. And, we're friendly with them, but, we piss them off quite a bit too, like on a corporate level. But the smaller ones, when I look at the smaller brands that we kind of compete with, let's call it sub $100 million in revenue.
Yeah.
I try to be friendly with them because like nobody has 100% market share.
Yeah.
And you might say, oh, there's trade secrets and this and that. It's like, no, but at the same time, unless you have, unless it's a brand, let's say with the Puracy example, unless it's a brand that is focused purely on pure ingredients and household cleaning and baby care products, like it's exactly the same thing as Puracy.
Yeah.
Then you probably have some different customer bases. You have some things to share. There's ways to be friendly. There's ways to be helpful. I think that because some of these things are so limited in their life cycle, if a brand doesn't do well, or if somebody exits a brand, that your paths are going to cross again. So I think that, burning bridges doesn't make a lot of sense. Even with big CPG where we just go out there and it's nothing personal. It's just more of right now, any way you can sort of get some buzz, right, and get some exposure is going to be key. Even if you're just you're pushing a little bit too hard, we can do that now because there's no downside. The downside is just we file bankruptcy and close up shop and we're no longer a startup. But likely big CPG isn't going to come after you for that. They're going to send you a letter and that's it. But if they send you a letter, that means you're onto something. Right?
Oh,
they
yeah.
send you a cease and desist. That's like, okay, we have struck a chord. We know that this is bothering them. Great.
You hit a nerve.
So
yeah.
we hit a nerve.
A good thing. Yeah. It's interesting.
So,
really interesting. Yeah. If we think about one of the last things I have for you, one of the rules of becoming radical from your perspective, you're building something great. What is that one thing you could say, this is what I would do? If I could do one thing, one piece of advice to somebody listening in, you want to change the world, you want to change your industry, you want to challenge what's gone on for years, because so many people get stuck in, I'm going to do this because everybody else did and it worked, but you want to go about it a different way. You want to change the world. You want to change the game, right? So if you could give a piece of advice, to somebody listening in as to a rule of becoming radical, so to speak, whatever we want to call it, what would that one thing be? What would be that one leave behind, if there is one? And it might be a few things.
I had a friend of mine that said this, and he said that the world is malleable, and if you hit it hard enough with a hammer, it's going to change. And I think you need to have that mindset as an entrepreneur because, you watch things like, Travis Kalanick at Uber and what he did and how hard he pushed. And then you realize, like, at the time, like, that was his vision, but he didn't know it was going to be reality. He just took that and just jammed it down the throats of everybody. It's just like, no, this is the way it's going to be. I'm going to revolutionize ride sharing.
Yep.
And then, meal delivery, and then so on and so forth. And I think you really need to kind of put yourself in that mindset that there are no written rules here, right? If you want to change the world, you can do it. You just have to push hard. And I think that we are blessed to be in the presence of Elon Musk. Put his political opinions aside if you don't like what he has to say on that side. But from an entrepreneur standpoint, what he has done, where he had sold PayPal and he took all that money and he put it into SpaceX and was living on somebody's couch, and he just takes everything and just doubles down further. And he just, he just has this mentality of, I'm going to risk it all because I believe this is where the world should go. And I think you need to think about that on a micro scale of what you're doing, because you look at the brands that have grown and have sold and stuff. I mean, that's the difference, right? Is that they thought like this is the future. This is what's going to happen. And until it doesn't resonate with your customers, you're in a position where you can change the world. You can change these things and change consumer mindsets. And when you start to see it happening, it becomes a drug at that point. It's so like your adrenaline rushes, the dopamine hits, you just like, whoa, we're on something. We are riding this wave, and it feels really cool. But until then, you have to sort of stick to your guns. You have to stick to the bias to action. You have to stick to the grit. You have to stick to the risk taking. And then again, I'll wrap up with it is make sure you have a CFO looking at your books so you can run out of money.
Exactly. Don't run out of money. Golden rule of business. Stay in business. That's it. Don't run out of money. Have that CFO. Yeah, totally. And I enjoy what you said, because I say the same thing every day. I feel like I'm talking to myself here. It's great. It's an exciting conversation. No, if you think about it, politics aside, Elon Musk is brilliant, and I say this literally every day. And what he has done, he put all the chips back on the table again and again and again. He took a smaller piece of Tesla, 20% or something, and it doesn't matter because Tesla is, it's gone through the roof. If you were in a coma 30 years ago, you woke up today, you'd be like, that's another cool car, but they require some level of education. But because people are in day-to-day times and they see Tesla and they know Tesla, they've done very, very well. They've cornered that market. And even if there are some dips in sales, they're still going to do well. It's because they're getting into robotics and all sorts of things and solar. And but I loved everything you said about that. And it's so, so true. So this has been an amazing time to sit and chat with you, Sean, to hear your success stories, Puracy, what you're building with Dad Mode, your dips and things that you've been challenged with, the lessons learned, the leave behinds for our audience. We have, all loved it. I'm sure people tuning in will feel the same I do. I'm very excited for that. And I agree wholeheartedly. You can change the world. Just keep going. If you believe in it, it's the first step. But if you don't have that self-belief, no one else can. It's almost impossible. So I've really enjoyed this. Where can everybody find Dad Mode? Where are you guys at? A little plug online, social. Where can we go to learn more about Dad Mode?
Yeah, so Dad Mode, you can find Dad Mode at godadmode.com. You can find it on Amazon, and you can find it on TikTok Shop right now. And we are in discussions, and we will have a flagship retailer in 2026 next year.
Very cool. Very exciting. Well, we will be following you, supporting you, cheering you guys on, buying your products as dads, as people who are dad enthusiasts who want to support the brand in modern times and be with our kids and teach them great values. You guys are mission driven. We're excited to see your success in market, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show to learn more about that growth journey ahead in the next several months and years to come.
Thank you, Michael. It's great being here today and talking to you.
Amazing, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Radical. If today's episode sparked something in you, follow wherever you listen, join the conversation, and share it with someone ready to think beyond limits. Be unlimited, be bold, and become radical. See you next time.